This Choircast podcast is brought to you by Holy Heretics, the post-evangelical podcast where being labeled a heretic is a good thing. We're starting conversations about God, politics, Christian nationalism, sexuality, gender, spiritual abuse, faith deconstruction, and how to recover from evangelicalism. Nothing is off limits in our conversations with scholars, activists, and writers in our quest to find a freer faith. Listen wherever you get your podcast or check us out at sophiasociety.org/podcast.
The mind that was in Jesus, that mind is in me.
Without me, life has no meaning.
Why would God tell you what I'm thinking and tell you what I've said to my wife or my husband when you're not around? It's because I'm the pastor of the church and I need to know.
This is the only place where you can see truth.
Hey, heathens, you're listening to the Deadly Faith Podcast, where religion and crime collide. I'm Laci.
And I'm Lola.
And this shit is appalling. Hey, guys, welcome back to another spooky Halloween serial killer episode we're bringing at you.
Dun, dun.
I hate to say I hope you're enjoying them. I hope you're learning a lot, and I hope you're enjoying Lola and I presenting them in our slightly hilarious comedy from time to time.
Oh, just slightly.
Just slightly.
Credit where credit is due. You're pretty funny.
Oh, shucks. I think you're pretty funny too. So there's that.
Thanks.
Okay, so we aren't going to waste much time. We're just going to jump into today's case because I have a lot to present to you guys, and I don't want to go over, an hour and a half to 2 hours. So let's just get into this.
Tell me about Dan.
Dan, not the man. So Lee Corwin is a serial killer that you probably do not know, or you have probably never heard of, because I'm pretty sure I'm the only one that has covered him on YouTube whenever I had my YouTube channel. And there is a book, and that's how I found out about this case, called The Demon Next Door, written by Bryan Burrough. And the reason that I found out about this case was from my sister. Long story short, she mentioned that something that was going on in my life reminded her of this case. And she told me about the book. I listened to it and I was like, holy shit, because it is on Audible. Audible, sponsor us. Anyways, moving on. So before we jump in, I'm going to give you guys some trigger warnings. Today's case is a lot. I will be upfront with you on this one. This is a lot. So there is sexual assault, there's rape, victim shaming, murder, declining mental health, and schizophrenia. And the murder is very graphic, and we have to talk about the aspects of the murder. So it's going to get graphic. So please, if any of that is too much for you, come back, listen to another episode, or maybe see you after the serial killers. Because honestly, all of the serial killers we're going to be covering are pretty graphic and just a hell of a lot. So anyways, moving on. So let's jump in. Lee Corwin, he was born September 15th, 1958 in Garden Grove, California. His father worked in a lot of different factory type settings. And so this meant that his family moved around a lot. When Danny was a teen, his family ended up landing in Temple, Texas. So Texas is huge. So to give you kind of a roundabout area of this, where it's at, it is about an hour and a half-ish or an hour from College Station, and that's where A&M is. So he was in that vicinity. His family were members of the local Pentecostal church, where his mom, Nancy, sang in the choir, and where both his parents would help in the youth group. Many times his parents would actually oversee even the church lock-ins. They were the family that was at church literally anytime the church doors were open. Sunday morning, Sunday afternoon, Wednesday afternoons, or Wednesday evenings, and like anytime the church had an event, prayer meeting, potluck, what you name it, they're there.
Oh, I miss potluck. How could you say
I
this?
do miss potlucks, man. I know. I'm sorry. They always had the best food because it was always the old ladies at the potlucks that always had like good homemade cooking stuff. Oh,
I just have to say this one thing about potluck at the Church of Christ I used to go to. There was this lady that would always make these huge cookies. By huge, I mean probably the size of my hand. I have a smallish hand, but like pretty much the size of your hand. And like the chocolate, it wasn't chocolate chips, it was chocolate chunks. Like chunks. And then like sea salt on top. It was so good.
God damn.
So good.
Now my mouth's watering.
I know, same.
Now I'm going to have to make my cookies that I love so much. Oh my gosh.
Yay!
Well, growing up, Danny was described as a normal kid. He was an average student who liked drawing, camping, and he was even in the Boy Scouts. But on the other hand, his classmates saw him as a weird kid. He was awkward around peers, like people his own age, but he actually was able to connect and he wasn't as awkward around younger kids, which to me says like emotional developmental delay of some sort if he's able to connect with younger kids, but not kids his own age. Due to Danny's father, his name is Phil, shuffling from job to job, it meant that Danny and them moved around a lot. And this made it even harder for Danny to make friends or maintain friendships. And so he ended up becoming a loner as he got older, especially into his teen years. Growing up, his parents saw him as a good kid. And I put that in quotations, good kid. He was considered to be very compliant, and he would do anything and everything to get the approval of his parents and other adults.
I'm so sick of the narrative that a good kid has to qualify as obedient and compliant.
I hate it because it's like kids who are disobedient is a normal fucking child. Like it is part of development. If your child is constantly obedient, they need to be in therapy because something's wrong.
Absolutely.
Just ask literally any child who was seen as the perfect kid. just ask. Now, he never got into fights. He was never suspended. He never got into trouble. He wanted the approval of all adults. And so he towed the line. While his parents saw him as a good kid, his doctors, on the other hand, actually saw him being the good kid and always needing the approval of adults as something wrong developmentally with Danny. So in order for them to understand Danny a little bit better, the doctors gave him a questionnaire. So this questionnaire had questions like, I feel, and then it's a blank, and Danny was supposed to fill in the blank. And with that question, he put in, I can't ever leave my parents. So I feel I can't ever leave my parents. Another question said, my greatest fear, blank. And he said, my greatest fear is my parents will die before I'm ready.
Oh my God.
So as somebody who is trauma informed, to me, this screams there is like what is it called? What is it? I'm drawing a blank. Bonding.
It's like a complete reliance on.
Yeah. Trauma, not trauma bonding, but what the hell?
I know what you're trying to say, and I also don't know the words. Yeah.
Unhealthy. Yeah, I swear to God, I can't speak to it, but you guys get what I'm saying, right? There is a level of unhealthy connection, enmeshment, reliance that he is having on his parents. And the doctors are seeing this as a red flag of sorts. Now, the doctors were also worried about Danny's emotions and emotional development. Danny struggled with wetting the bed, and usually this can indicate some kind of emotional distress in a child. We've seen this with kids who are molested or raped or anything as a child and have sexual trauma. They will be wetting the bed, and that is because they don't know how to deal with that. They have a lot of these emotions. They don't know how to handle it, and that ends up resulting in bedwetting. Now, I will come out and say Danny was not molested as a child that we know of. Nothing has ever been said to that. So the doctors at this point are just saying like, hey, there's some emotional distress, developmental delay, something's going on. But his parents were just like, no, he's just a good kid and a hard sleeper.
What?
They very much just
a hard sleeper
brushed it off like that's nothing. It's fine.
Okay.
So growing up, there was a little girl named Becky Exley. They went to church with Becky Exley and her family, and both families, the Corwins and the Exleys, were friends. They would go do stuff outside of church together, and Danny would actually babysit Becky. Now, Becky is like a good handful of years younger than Danny. Keep that in mind. As Danny started hitting puberty, his peers noticed he was obsessed with sex. And not the normal, I've hit puberty and sex sounds interesting and I'm getting a boner every morning. It is every joke, every conversation, every moment of every day, he is talking about sex. And even boys his age who are also hitting puberty are like, dude, chill the fuck out. This is weird. So during this time, as Danny is a teen, on March 15th, 1974, Danny's neighbors had an 8-month-old baby, and they decided to hire a 15-year-old girl named Kathy as their babysitter so they could go out on a date. A little while after putting the baby to bed, Kathy heard the boy crying, so she went upstairs to check on him, but was confronted in the hallway by a naked teen. He tells her that if you scream, I'll kill you, and then he forces her into the master bedroom, makes her get naked, and then proceeds to rape Kathy.
Oh my God.
When he finished, Kathy got up, scooped up her clothes, and locked herself in the bathroom very quickly. But after only being in the bathroom for a few minutes, she hears a knock at the door and she's scared. But eventually she opens it because she's like, he's going to either break down the door or and hurt me, or I open it. So she just opened it. And as she opened it, the light from the bathroom shines on the boy's face, and she actually got a good look at the boy. And he says, you have my shirt. So I guess when she scooped up her clothes, she scooped up his shirt as well.
Random.
Now, he ends up telling her that she doesn't know him. He lives across town. He goes to school across town. She doesn't know him. And the boy left. Kathy then locks herself back in the bathroom and just waits for the baby's parents to get home. Mm-hmm. When they get home, they found Kathy distraught, locked in that bathroom. She tells them what happened, and they immediately call the police. Now, she explains what the boy looks like when the cops get there. Mm-hmm. And just from how she explained it, the owner of the house, so the little boy's dad, said, that sounds like Danny, who lives next door. So the cops went over there the next day and talked with Danny and his father. And Danny, of course, denies everything. He's like, no, I was home, but I never left the house. Kathy returned. When she was actually talking with the cops, she said that she thought that it was some boy at school named Speedy, but she wasn't sure.
Named Speedy.
She thought she might have recognized. I know, right? That's all I ever found out.
I've been squinting at you the whole time, and then suddenly Speedy was the thing that got me.
So a few days later, Kathy returns to school. She sees Speedy and quickly is like, okay, Speedy's not the guy who raped me. So she calls the cops and says, no, it wasn't Speedy. So they continue to question Danny, and Danny continues to deny it. And they ask him if he'll take a polygraph. And so he agrees, sure, I'll take a polygraph. So the first time he takes a polygraph and it comes back inconclusive. So they make him take it again. Second time comes back inconclusive. So they make him take it again. Third time also comes back inconclusive. And so at that point, with 3 inconclusive polygraphs, the cops talk to Kathy and just tell her that with no direct evidence and with, there's nothing even with the polygraph, and with you wrongly identifying another boy at the beginning, we can't do anything, and we can't charge Danny with the rape. And so the case goes cold. Danny's parents and many people at his church chalked it up to, it's just a case of mistaken identity. That's all.
She saw his face.
I know. Saw his face. And even the owner of the home was like, that sounds like the next door neighbor boy.
Okay. What year
Just
is
from
this?
how she described
also,
it.
I'm sorry. What year is this?
Was 1974. So March of 1974.
Sadly,
not the best time to be a sexual assault victim. Not that it's a whole lot better today.
I was going to say, sadly, this sounds very on track for the times.
Yeah.
Not that it should have been, but yeah, that makes sense.
Oh, just wait. Just fucking wait. Because I tell you. So on May 16th, 1975, the Corwin family was supposed to go to a church retreat. So that day, Danny was supposed to leave school around noon, go home, get some stuff, and then meet his dad at his work. So Danny left school around noon, but instead of leaving the school and going to his house, he decided to just hang out in the parking lot. And at 2 p.m. that day, a girl named Brenda Evans also leaves a little bit early. And as she's walking through the parking lot, she sees Danny sitting on the hood of the car right beside her car. She says hi. He says hi back. And she goes to get in her car. She gets in, sits down, puts her stuff in her seat, and then leans over to get an 8-track off of the ground, right? And then when she leans up, Danny is standing in her doorway. Lola's over there laughing at me right now because I said 8-track. Because I told her the story about when I presented this case over on YouTube. I was talking about 8 tracks, and I go, oh my God, do you guys remember the 8 tracks? And then you have to like stick the pencil inside and like wind it up. And after I like recorded that, edited it, and posted it, my husband watched it and started laughing his butt off because he's like, Laci, an 8-track and a cassette tape are 2 different things. And I was like, oh,
She's
dumb.
showing her age.
So,
She's showing her age is all.
I was telling Lola that story. And so then we got to it in the actual story. She's like, 8-track and it made her laugh.
Can you explain to me, is he on the passenger side or is he on her side? And
no, he's in the driver's side.
Okay.
He's on the driver's side. So she's in the she's in the driver's seat. He's like the door's open and he's standing there right in her doorway. And he holds a knife. He's holding a knife to her and he says, scoot over. Now, at first she thinks it's a joke and just starts laughing, but Danny starts screaming at her to scoot over.
Panic.
Now, Brenda, remember, she's a teen. Yeah, panicking fucking shit out of herself, I'm sure. So she's a teen. Of course, she's scared and she quickly moves over. Not that anybody's going to be scared in that moment, but her first response is comply. And I understand that. So she moves over to the passenger seat. Danny gets in and drives away from the school. Brenda is scared and starts asking Danny where he's taking her. But every single time she asks, he just starts yelling at her and telling her to shut up. Danny ends up taking her about 1.5 miles away from the school and parks in like a foresty area. He holds the knife to her and tells her to undress while they're still in the car. She refuses. So Danny crawls on top of her with the knife in her face. And he tells her that if she doesn't undress herself, he will rip the clothes off of her.
Oh my God.
Now, in fear, Brenda complies. So Danny gets out of the car so that she can undress. But as she's undressing, she's not going fast enough for him. So he starts ripping all of her clothes off and throwing them into a muddy puddle. He then gets in the car, covers Brenda's mouth, and begins to rape her. After he got himself dressed, like after he gets done, Brenda tried to plead with him to just leave her, but Danny would not listen. And he got himself dressed and he tried to get Brenda out of the car, but she did not want to. She was like, I want my clothes. And he refused. So she kicked him in the nuts. And he was like, oh, okay. And he gave her clothes.
That's so good. Go, Brenda.
I know, right? I was like, that's right, girl. So she gets herself dressed and she gets out of the vehicle. When she got out, she like slightly stepped away from Danny. And I think he assumed that she was trying to get away. So he went to grab her and then it ended up in this like struggle between the two. And it ended with Brenda on the ground and Danny on top of her. Before Brenda knew what was happening, Danny started stabbing her in the fleshy part of her right arm.
God.
So like right in the top of her arm, he just stabs her. Now Brenda's screaming, of course, and she starts saying, do you know what you're doing? And he replies with, I know exactly what I'm doing.
Why would she say, do you know what you're doing? I'm sorry, that not... I think you say all different types of things during attacks.
Yeah, I think I'm trying to put myself in somebody who's a teen. Maybe she's 16, 17 around this time. And she knows Danny. She's been to school with Danny. And she's been in this like stage of shock for a long time. And I think him stabbing her was so out of left field because she actually knew her perpetrator that she was like, do you know what you're doing? Like maybe he's like having a manic episode or he's out of his mind. And so I can see that being the reason she said that in that moment.
Yeah. I mean,
if that makes sense.
I think it's really interesting that she did say that. And I'm glad that she did.
Yeah.
I'm glad that she did. I don't know if maybe it made him think a little bit.
Getting him to talk.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it did not. It did not make him think because he's like, I know exactly what I'm doing. He then stabbed her in the stomach, and then he put the knife against her throat and slit Brenda's throat.
Oh my God, that was a jump.
Yeah. Brenda immediately grabs her neck, trying to hold the blood back, but Danny stabs her again in the stomach. And then lastly, he puts the knife against her chest between her breasts and, looking at her very sadistically, starts pushing the knife in slowly. Not fast, not a stab, just slowly in between her breasts.
How did people not know about this case? This just...
You'll understand why. You'll understand why the more we go into it.
Is he protected by money?
Now,
tell me. No, I'm just kidding.
No, not money. Brenda knows that Danny, at this point, she's been stabbed multiple times, is not going to leave her unless he thinks she's dead. So she pretends. She pretends to be dead. He
Smart girl.
Stands up and watches as she lays there bleeding.
Oh, shit.
And dying. He just watches. She's pretending to be dead. And then after a minute, he covers her body in a piece of plywood and some dirt. He then goes and gets her car, throws all of her stuff out of it, gets the car and takes off. But he turns the car around to where he's driving straight at Brenda's body. And just before he gets to her, he turns and barely misses her. Barely. Now,
I've never hated a man more than right now.
I mean, castrate anybody?
Mm-hmm.
Now, with 2 stabs to the stomach, a stab to the chest, a stab to the upper part of her right arm, and a slit throat, Brenda is able to get all of the debris off of her and make her way to the road. As she is looking at herself in this condition, she is shocked to see all of her wounds and at the same time, still be alive. When she looked at her chest where Danny stabbed her, she noticed that the clasp from her bra is what kept the knife from going in any further. And later it was said that it is part of what saved her life. Because if he would have gone any deeper, he would have hit her heart.
I got to start wearing bras again.
Yeah. And I think she said clasp. And so I'm thinking it was like one of those like
the front
clip
clasp?
in the front type bras.
Those are so rare now.
They really are. Really are. Now, Brenda made it to the road and a passerby saw her and stopped to offer help. They took her down the road to a golf course where they called the police and an ambulance. Now, when Danny took off in her car, he went and hid her car behind a barn, and then he just went back to school and made small talk with people and his classmates in the parking lot.
He went back to school?
He went back to school. Yep. He even went to Dairy Queen with a classmate named Jenny to get a drink. Yep. On the way over to Dairy Queen, Jenny asks him what he had done that day. And he said, quote, "I did some strange things today."
Oh, really now? Just strange? Okay.
Yeah, you did here, buddy. What the fuck?
Oh, I took another route. I stabbed a girl while, after raping her and slitting her throat, No biggie.
Just some strange things. They also, while they were in the car on the radio, but it was announced on the radio, the attack. And
that was quick.
She said
that was good.
He made no mention, no flinching, like it didn't faze him one way or another, hearing it over the radio.
Wow.
He also asked Jenny to take him out to his father's work and drop him off. So she did. Back at the golf course, ambulances arrive, and while they are stabilizing Brenda, she tells police that it was Danny Lee Corwin who attacked her. Officer Kenneth Milner was on scene at the golf course, and when he heard it was Danny, he knew exactly where to go to try and find him. You see, Officer Kenneth Milner was the same investigator for the rape of the 15-year-old Kathy the year prior.
Damn.
Yeah. So he knew exactly who Danny was. And so he went
a stroke of luck in that way.
Yep. He went straight to Danny's house. Of course, nobody's home. So he knocks on the door next door. And he said that he was looking for the Corwin family and specifically Danny. And the mom or the wife at this house said, I can assume why. And Officer Milner says that he's looking for Danny because he's a suspect in an aggravated sexual assault. And she responds with, that sounds about right.
What?
Mm-hmm.
Red banner, huge.
Well, remember it was her son who Kathy babysat.
Oh,
the year prior.
Yeah.
So this is the neighbor who Kathy babysat for, and then Danny came and raped her while she was babysitting their son.
It's all coming full circle. Full circle.
So they knew, everybody knew it was Danny. Well, at least this family knew it was Danny. They just couldn't tie him to it, the first one. Now the wife tells the officer where Nancy, Danny's mom, works. And so he heads over there. He finds Nancy, tells her what's going on. And she's like, he should be at Phil's work, which is his dad. So she follows the officer over to Phil's work. But as they're driving over, they see the family station wagon drive past them. And the officer notices that it's Danny driving. So he flips around and he tries to get Danny to stop. But Danny decides that he's going to run for it. And a chase ensues. Danny reaches up to like 90 miles per hour while the cop is trying to get him to stop. He goes in front of Danny and like turns in front of him and cuts him off. So he has to stop and forces him to, and puts Danny under arrest. As he's put under arrest, of course, they're taking him back to the police station. And somehow, I don't know how all of this happened, but somehow Phil, the dad, ends up at the police station before Danny and the police officer arrive. As they pull Danny out of the car and are walking into the police station, his dad is yelling at him, keep your mouth shut. Don't say anything.
I mean, good parental advice.
Yes.
With get a lawyer, even if you're innocent, always get a lawyer. But
it is hard to not be judgmental in a moment like
because
that.
We know, and they know.
Yeah, it's because we know.
They know that he knows. They know.
And I know it's hard to not, I know that's sound advice, but it's hard to not feel like that is a sign of guilt for me. It really is. And I know it shouldn't. But it does. It does. Well, Danny and Brenda in this situation are both minors. And so since they're minors, the case wasn't talked about in the media very much. I think there was like a small section in the newspaper that talked about the attack, but it didn't name the perpetrator or the victim. In jail, Danny was given a $10,000 bond. He stayed in jail for 30 days before he was bonded out. But during those 30 days, a lot happened amongst the community and the church and everything. So let's talk about what happened.
I was going to ask, how does this get religious? Because
we're about to get into that. So Brenda's father was a prominent member in their community. He was on the board of education, and he was the type of man that was loud, demanding, and always got his way. So after his daughter was attacked, he was very vocal about wanting justice for her. Yeah, I agreed. I would be too. And he had a lot of people backing him, but Danny's family had the backing of the Pentecostal church. And especially the pastor, Wilson Keenan. Pastor Keenan didn't believe that Danny could do this, and he used everything in his power to help the Corwin family. During this time, the 30 days, the church became divided because half the church believed Danny did do it and that the whole family just needed to be shunned, while the other half didn't believe that Danny did it and that this was just another case of mistaken identity. How many times can this kid be mistaken for a rapist?
This is defiance. This is not an
willful ignorance. Come on.
For sure.
The church was also spreading rumors about Brenda, saying that she was loose, she slept around, and that she lured Danny, meaning it was ultimately her fault.
They need to come talk to me. We need to have words. Me and them. And Weya. We need to all have a discussion right now.
Like, don't you dare spread those nasty rumors, bitch. So remember earlier when I was talking about Becky Exley, the young girl that Danny used to babysit when she was there? Yeah. So that girl said that during this time that Danny was in jail, that everybody in the church thought that Brenda was a whore. So good job spreading Jesus' love, calling people whores for being raped and almost murdered.
Hey, a whore did God's work, so they can shut the fuck up.
That is true.
So lots of whores did God's work.
Bitch.
So, fuck
That's
you
right.
guys.
Right? After Danny was bonded out, he resumed life as usual, like they always do. He went to church, acted as if nothing happened. While some thought Danny should be banned from the church, at least until the case had been resolved, Pastor Keenan welcomed him with open arms. Yeah. Not only that, Pastor Keenan also used the church to try to raise money to pay for Danny's defense.
I was going to say, this is going to turn into the church protecting this young man because they're going to blame it on the woman and how the woman ate the apple and who's what's it. Do. Love that.
Yep, exactly. Exactly. During the lead up to the trial, the pastor was beyond driven to keep Danny out of jail. He said that even if Danny did do the crime, he didn't need to go to jail. He needed to get mental health help or a therapist or, quote, church counseling. Excuse me. Church counseling? No.
None of that has ever helped anybody.
No.
I don't know a single person. Okay, you know what I find really funny? And you know what? If you go to Church of the Highlands and you happen to go to one of these marriage conferences, I hope it works out for you. And I hope all the best things for your marriage, genuinely. However, almost every single person I know that has attended those got divorced either that year or a couple years later. I don't see it doing much good. Like the therapy that they offer their members just seems to be like more like false hope than like realistic solutions.
Yeah. And it's like, okay, if you are getting church counseling, 9 out of 10 times the person who is counseling you, they have a degree in crock pots.
What?
They don't have no license. They're not a therapist.
No, yeah.
They're a stay-at-home mom who cooks meals and cleans, which is nothing wrong with that, but it doesn't mean you need to be given marriage advice.
No, it's giving 8 passengers. It's giving 8 passengers vibes. Is it not?
I'm 1,000%. Or Connections, her new
we'll talk about it more later. But I digress.
Please talk about that.
Please continue.
We'll talk about her. Oh, she got me fired up now. So he's like, he needs therapy, a mental health hospital. He doesn't need jail. Danny's defense lawyer was a former FBI agent, and he knew that Danny had a small chance of winning the case. Danny wasn't a conversational type, so he was like, I'm not putting you on the stand. That's not going to go good. So what we need to do is we need to have you take a polygraph. So he had Danny take a polygraph, and he actually passed the polygraph. And the person who was giving the polygraph test could tell that Danny was lying, but the machine was saying he was telling the truth. And so the person giving the test thought, I'm going to bluff. And so he told Danny that he failed. And the moment he told Danny he failed, Danny broke, confessed to everything.
I don't condone lying, but like it's these moments where they bluff that like it tends to just crack everything open.
I was like, what, that cracked him? Just saying, oh, you failed? And he was like, bah. But okay, you have to think about it. We're in the 70s.
Polygraphs held weight back
like
then.
The Holy Grail. They held so much weight. So I'm sure the hearing he failed was also equivalent to hearing we found your DNA on her body, kind of thing. So I'm sure that's what made him break. So at this point, both the prosecution and the defense thought that with all the evidence and Danny's confession, this was going to be a slam dunk case for a life sentence. But old Pastor Keenan just couldn't have that. And so he went to the prosecutor's office to try to negotiate. Well, no. More like demand for Danny to get a deal of some sort. So at first, he demanded to have the whole case thrown out. Just throw it out. No, just throw it out. The prosecutor looked at him and said, he cut her throat. So then the pastor was like, okay, well, how about we agree to like probation for Danny?
Probation.
Yeah. And so again, the prosecutor's like, he
Slit her
cut
throat.
her throat. So the pastor then replies with, but they're a good family. They didn't know what Danny had done.
This isn't about them. This is about him. It's about the victim.
Who the fuck cares? Who the fuck cares?
You know what? I wonder what the sermons looks like. Like in the weeks that this was happening. If I could peer into that, I wonder what it would look like.
You're right. I wish I could. Now, as the prosecutor is sitting there and the Pastor Keenan, he's trying, he starts to proceed to berate Brenda's character. He calls her a whore. He says that she slept around, and he says that she lured Danny in. The prosecutor is shocked, not because of what he's hearing, because this was very common in sexual assault cases back in these days for the defense to attack the character of the victim, because DNA was not a thing. And so all you had was, well, he said, she said type cases when it comes to this kind of stuff. So this is stuff that he had heard time and time again, but he'd never heard it coming out of a pastor's mouth. So he was like, what the hell? Now I do want to note that this is in Texas. This has been outlawed, that like you're not allowed to go after the victim's character in sexual assault or rape cases. So I was like, okay, Texas, you got something right. Good job.
The one thing,
right. As he is berating Brenda's character, the prosecutor is pissed. He is flaming because he has a confession. They do not need to prove anything. They have a literal confession from Danny. And so he just yells, he cut her throat, and just screams at the pastor. Like, I shouldn't have to explain this to you.
I didn't think I'd have to write that one down for you. Bo Burnham.
I shouldn't have to be defending a rape victim who was almost murdered.
The fact that she survived is just
astounding.
I feel like throwing up.
Right? Yeah. I can't even with this guy. Brenda's testimony was a huge part of this trial, and since the prosecutor knew that the defense was going to go after her character, he felt obligated to talk to Brenda's dad and warn him about what was coming. After the father heard how they were going to berate Brenda, he couldn't take that, and he was like, no, I'm not letting my daughter take the stand and be attacked like that. I'm not going to do it. I completely understand the father doing this. So what this did was it left both sides wanting to come to some kind of plea deal and avoid a trial. But the defense didn't know that Brenda wouldn't testify at this time. So they are like really eager to do a plea deal. And the prosecution offered 30 years. And in Texas at this time, it meant that Danny would serve maybe 10 to 15, depending on good behavior. The defense was excited and said yes, but the prosecution went to Brenda's father, and he refused because he said it wasn't enough time, which I agree. Now, right before the trial was supposed to start, Danny actually decided to plead guilty. And this meant that he was having a sentencing trial, not an actual trial. So this was just to figure out like how long he'd get in prison. Before the trial started, Danny was assessed by a mental health professional, and he was diagnosed with latent schizophrenia. So at the sentencing trial, the defense brought up his mental health, and Danny had different witnesses who spoke on his character to try and help him get a lesser sentence.
I'm sorry, pause. I'm not a very smart man. What is latent schizophrenia?
Google says that latent schizophrenia is a mental disorder that affects a person's ability to tell what is real and not real, to act normal, and to think clearly, but with no history of schizophrenia episodes.
Interesting. The more you know.
It's interesting. I'll just leave it at that because I just don't know that I see that.
Honestly, I have a hot take.
Go for it.
Any mental health diagnosis from the 60s and back, I feel like was wrong and wasn't handled correctly.
Yeah. And
that's just me.
I don't think it was taken into consideration, like the fact that he did this after raping her.
Yeah.
And so it's like there was a very large sexual aspect to the crime. And those are different mental health diagnoses, you know, when it comes to sexual gratification and murder and things like that. So I'm not going to take that with a grain of salt. Let's just say that. Now, the people that talked about his character, I think it was just like his family and maybe a person or two from church. On the other side, the prosecution, they had witnesses like the officers and the EMTs who took care of Brenda, and they gave their testimony of what they saw when they arrived and her condition. Now, this was very, convincing because they're like, her throat was slit. She's bleeding everywhere. She was stabbed here. She was stabbed there. That is a very strong testimony to be given. Brenda actually does end up taking the stand at the sentencing trial. I think since Danny decided to plead guilty, it just made her father feel more comfortable with her taking the stand at this point because they weren't trying to prove or not prove anything. It was just them deciding, like, what was the extent of the crime and what will be the extent of his punishment and time in prison.
Did she get to say, fuck you, bitch, from the stand?
I wish. I don't know.
Or come here, let me give you another kick, boy. You didn't get enough?
And I can't imagine what she probably felt, like having to sit there and face her perpetrator.
Along with like her parents. That's the thing with sexual crimes, having to like relive it is already horrible. And then in front of strangers, plus loved ones, plus the abuser. It's like, it's just a whole lot to do all at once.
Yeah.
So
when people say like, I can't, like when victims say I can't take the stand or I can't come forward, I get it. It took me 30 some years before I even told my family.
Yeah.
Or not 30 some years. It took me till I was 30
Hey, there's no shame.
Tell my family what happened as a child.
There's no shame.
It's such a huge thing to try to understand. And you only understand it if you've actually been a victim of any kind of sexual assault.
And I hope none of you ever are.
Yes. And if you have, I'm sorry. Since she took the stand, the defense could actually like cross-examine her, but they decided not to because if they did and they went after her character, it would actually just look really bad on Danny and could actually get him more time in jail since he confessed to it and pled guilty. The judge who was in charge of sentencing Danny really wanted him to get some help. So he made sure that the prison Danny would be incarcerated at would give him mental health treatment. So he called over there, made sure they were going to have it, and they said yes. So I thought that was really good of a judge in this time frame of the decades, right? So he ended up sentencing Danny to 40 years. The Corwins were crushed, of course, seeing Danny get put away for so long. But on the other hand, Brenda's family were highly disappointed because they didn't feel like it was long enough for what he had done to their daughter.
Hell no.
I don't think any time's long enough. He tried to murder her.
He took her life in a whole other way that she has to
she will never
deal with.
She'll never be the same.
Yeah.
Lock him up and throw away the key.
Any kind of sexual crime, in my opinion, is taking someone's life from them. It was their former life, though. Like, they still have to move on and create a new life for themselves post-crime.
They should have locked him away and thrown away the key. They should have done it. They should have just done
Is he out?
We're jumping ahead. We'll get there.
Okay.
We will get there. Mm-hmm. So Danny goes to prison. When he goes to prison, most of the town just moved on past the incident, didn't talk about it. Both parties were minors, so it wasn't talked about in the news. And Brenda's classmates knew that she just wanted to move on and just get back to normal living. She didn't bring it up, and so they didn't either. They just let her live her life. So it kind of just got pushed to the back burner, and it was what it was. During Danny's mental health treatments in prison, he told them he heard voices that would tell him to do things. It also came out that he was raped in prison by another inmate and that he was sexually assaulted. He sexually assaulted animals as a child.
No.
Mm-hmm. Thankfully, that's all we know. So we don't have any more details for that.
Thank God.
Thank God. He was put on some meds because, he was diagnosed with latent schizophrenia. So he was put on some meds and he was in segregated population. But after just a year, he was put into Gen Pop and he stopped his mental health treatment and his mental health medication.
Wow, that's not smart.
I don't know if you know anything about especially drugs that would treat latent schizophrenia. It is not a drug you just stop taking.
No, yeah, you have to wean.
That's not good. So was he weaned? I have no idea. But yeah, I would doubt it.
Damn.
But he was just off of it. And also latent schizophrenia, you're not cured after a year.
No, yeah.
Why was he taking off his meds? I have questions.
I also have questions and concerns, but.
Mm-hmm. Now, during his stay in prison, he got regular visits from his family and friends from church, like Becky Exley. I would like to make a note that Becky is around 4th or 5th grade during this time that she's visiting a convicted rapist.
No.
And attempted murderer.
I'm angry.
In prison, Danny's father told him that he needed to make the best of a bad situation. So he ran with that. He got his GED and he took some classes. Danny was considered to be a model prisoner. He got along with all the other inmates. He obeyed, the warden and the officers. He did great. He was so good, they gave him extra freedoms. He could go outside longer. He could go to sections nobody else could. He got extra library time. Like, he was A+, buddy. He was great at prison. Very good at it. Unfortunately, during the 70s and 80s, Texas was growing exponentially. And with that, problems arise.
I knew it.
Because more of a higher population means an increase in crime, which means more people going to prison.
Less space in the prison.
Exactly, which leads to overcrowding. So what happened was, in order to deal with this problem, the prisons started cutting sentences drastically. There was so much pressure on the prison system to get them out, push them out the back door, come in the front, push them out the back. And so you would get time cut off your sentence for fucking anything. He got time cut off for taking classes, for, good behavior, XYZ. He was able to get parole in 1986, meaning he only served 9 years of his 40-year sentence. Nine goddamn years. That's all
That's nothing.
That's all.
That's nothing.
No. For what he did, are you fucking kidding me?
That's literally slapping his victim in the face.
Okay, but get this. When he's released, he was surrounded by support from his family and his church. He was reformed. He's forgiven. Huh?
That doesn't work that way, but okay.
Yeah, he went back to church. He went back to life as if everything was normal. He didn't just get out of prison from being, a rapist and an attempted murderer. No. They even allowed him to lead one of the youth groups.
Oh, hell nah. Where's Medea?
What?
Somebody get Medea.
Fuck is going on? Yeah. Now, because of Pastor Keenan's support for Danny during the trial, and especially him trying to raise funds for Danny's defense, it caused a lot of tension within the church. And while Danny was in prison, Pastor Keenan was pushed out and a new pastor was put in. But that pastor knew everything that had happened, and he still allowed Danny.
I was going to say
around kids.
It didn't really matter.
So it
didn't matter.
You all supported this man. No.
Mm-hmm.
Also, after he left prison, Danny got a girlfriend for the first time in his life.
I'm nervous.
You want to know who his girlfriend was?
Who?
You want to know who it was?
No.
Yes.
No, it wasn't.
Yes, it was.
Shut up.
Yes, it was.
I'm going to throw up now.
Becky Exley.
Becky
fucking Exley was his girlfriend.
Becky, you could do better.
So
Come
9
on.
years. She's just barely out of high school at this point.
I'm fine. I just shuddered so hard.
What the fuck were her parents thinking? She was like 4th, 5th, 6th grade while she's visiting this man in prison. Why? Yeah. What the fuck? Now, Becky says later on that she felt groomed.
Oh,
I wonder why.
Honey, you were. I'm so sorry.
She was in, right. So when she was in high school, I don't know if she was out of high school or if this was like end of high school when she started dating Danny. I can't remember. But she felt groomed by Danny's parents because they thought that Becky would be this great role model for Danny. It would just lead him onto this good path in life. And so they had a very hands-off approach to their relationship. And this meant that they allowed Danny and Becky to have sex at their house anytime, which no shame in that. But just remember the church they're going to. you're not supposed to have sex before marriage.
They're orchestrating this.
They are very much orchestrating this. And they have been.
Do better.
Becky says that during the times that they had sex, this was honestly the first red flag that she could see. She, like, of course, hindsight, right? She said that multiple times during sex, Danny couldn't finish.
Okay.
And she questioned him about it. And he goes, it's normal for some guys to not be able to finish. It's normal.
Is it?
No.
Okay. I was about to say, every guy I've been with always finished.
Always. Unless you have ED, which usually you don't have that unless you're like an older man.
Or medications. Different medications can make that happen too.
Exactly. Yeah. He was not on any medications. She's young, so she's just like, okay,
right.
Sure. And she brushes it off. She had grown up having a huge crush on Danny since the time he would babysit her. She dreamed about marrying him. It was just this huge thing. And so she had worked this up in her head. And so she looked past a lot of stuff because she didn't want anything to come in between the fantasy that she had literally spent her whole life building.
Oh, honey.
And now they're dating, and everyone's goal is for Danny to get on with his life and get past his past. So they thought, okay, best thing we can do is get you in college. So they had Danny apply, and he got accepted into Mary Hardin-Baylor. But they were like, that's not good enough. We want you to even go further. We want you to go to A&M. So he spent one semester at Mary Hardin-Baylor, and while he was at Mary Hardin-Baylor, he applies for A&M and gets in. So he's like, everyone's all excited. He gets to go to A&M. Well, as he was paroled, part of his parole was that he had to go to counseling, and he had to have like check-ins with his parole officer.
Okay.
So in order for him to go to A&M, he had to get it passed by both his therapist and his parole officer because it was like an hour and a half away.
Mm-hmm.
They saw A&M as this very prestigious school. And so they were like, of course you can go, signed off. But when Danny started going to A&M in January of 1987, he stopped having check-ins with his parole officer, and he stopped having therapy sessions.
Oh my.
He'd only been out of jail for like 6 months, mind you.
What? This doesn't seem... The justice system...
When I say the system failed her, the system failed everybody. Like it failed time and time again. When Danny went to A&M, he reconnected with a man named Ben Pruitt. He was actually a volunteer. He did like the wood shop class in the prison. And so he was Ben Pruitt was very knowledgeable about inmates and prison, like life after prison kind of thing. And so they reconnected. Ben offered Danny a job at his cabinetry business. And he just told Danny, the only stipulation is you have to keep your nose out of trouble. And we're good. Danny agreed. And so he was hired. So Danny's at A&M. He's off on his own. He's living by himself. He's away from his parents for the first time in literally his entire life, besides the stint in prison. He was still around other people. On February 13th, 1987, 72-year-old Alice Price drove to her church in Normandy, Texas to do her daily 3-mile walk. Alice normally filled her days with reading the Bible, going to church, and getting in her daily exercise post having surgery on her heart a few years prior.
I love it.
I know, right? She's a go-getter.
She's keeping fit spiritually, physically. I love to hear it.
You think of an old Southern lady, that was Alice Price. She's the cutest.
I love her.
Now, she usually was home by 8:30 in the morning, but her grandson, David, he drove by the church at 8:50 and noticed that her car was still there. Didn't think much of it, but then he drove by again at 10 a.m. and realized that her car was still there at 10 a.m. And this sent him through the roof. Like alarm bells are going off. So he looks around. He cannot find her anywhere. And Normandy is a small town. It is just about 500 people, even today. And this is back in the 70s. So their population has probably fluctuated within like 50 to 100 people in the last 40, 50 years. So it's a very small area. When he couldn't find her, he notified the cops, and the cops started looking for her quickly. She's in her 70s. It's February. Yes, it's Texas, but it still gets cold. So they were very scared. There was a massive search for her. There were many volunteers, men on horseback. Everybody's looking for her. But unfortunately...
Listeners, I'm holding my forehead right now in anticipation, right? Because I know what the fuck is happening now.
I know. Unfortunately, they found nothing. So that whole day, Alice never returned home. And so by the time night fell, they had to call the search off and reconvene the next day. The next day, they continued their search. And around 4 p.m., some men discovered Alice's body in some bushes. Now, this gets slightly graphic, okay? She was naked, face down, and had a smiley face carved into her back. After her autopsy, it was found that she had been raped, strangled, and stabbed multiple times. The cops were baffled and lost. This was not something they knew how to deal with. Like I said, 500 to 600 people in this tiny little small town.
A smiley
the towns beside it are small.
A smiley face.
A fucking smiley face.
A little old lady.
Psychotic.
Naked, raped, smiley face, stabbed.
72 years old. You son of a bitch. Yeah. They didn't know how to deal with this. It's a tiny small town. They're not dealing with serial killers in Texas.
Yeah.
As they're trying to investigate this, they do have one witness come forward, and they said that they had seen a brown truck in the area, but that was all. The cops did hypnotize him to see if he could remember anything else, but it didn't work. And I'm sorry, Texas officers are hypnotizing people. You know someone, they're fucking desperate. They need more information.
They don't do that shit.
No.
They don't believe in that.
They went down every avenue that they could think of. One family member of Alice's was even like having ties with the mafia and loan sharks. And so they were like, that's gotta be it. Come on, mafia, loan sharks. No, led nowhere. Eventually, the investigation came to a halt and left everybody in town living on edge. Like, you've heard it before. It was the same in the 70s in Texas, small town. Nobody's locking their fucking doors. Everybody's just roaming the streets, and kids are playing and going to their neighbor's house, and it's normal. Not anymore. Everyone's freaked the fuck out, because if somebody can kill a 72-year-old lady and not just kill her, but rape her and carve a smiley face in her back, then nobody's safe. Literally nobody.
Tell me what happens. I'm on the edge of my seat.
Meanwhile, Danny was traveling back to Temple to spend time with Becky and his family on the weekends. Becky says that during this time, she started to catch Danny in some lies, and this was like red flag for her, right? The first lie she caught him in was Danny not paying one of his bills. I'm laughing because it was just so fucking stupid. He wasn't paying one of his bills. It was like a water bill or something like that. And she confronted him about it, and he was like, oh, no, I paid it. Like, it's fine. I paid it with a check. We're good. And so she's like, okay, go get the check and like, show me. I want to make sure it got paid. And the checks have like a carbon copy, right? And so he went out to his truck to get the carbon copy to show her. And when he comes back in and shows her, she's not stupid. She knows it was a check that was just fucking written. But again, she just lets it go, right? She doesn't want anything to come in between fantasy. Another time, Danny had left his wallet in Temple when he had visited. So Becky called the automotive shop where Danny said he worked. But when she calls, she found out that not only does Danny not work at this automotive shop, he had never worked there. Why did he lie about this? He had the job with Ben Pruitt at the cabinetry shop this entire time.
Why would it have mattered?
Why did he feel the need to lie about it? It was so, like I'm telling you, it's so stupid. Why did you lie about this? I don't get it.
Sometimes you create your own reality. You convince yourself of something like that. Super dumb.
He definitely did. So he tells, she gets worried about this. So she goes to Danny's father, tells him what's going on. And he at first was like, oh, I'm a little concerned, but then chalks it up to, oh, Danny just doesn't want to disappoint his parents. Like, he's probably just got another job and he doesn't want us to know he was let go or something. So like, we're fine. Again, they chalk everything up to just like little things. No. Now, due to these lies, Becky does start to lessen her trust of Danny over time.
Valid. Good girl. Yes.
Right. And when Danny started like trying to come back to Temple for the weekends, many times Becky would make sure that she was out of town because she like started to not want to see him. I was like, good call. Good call. Another thing that was happening during this time, Danny was failing in school. He was failing so badly that he was actually kicked out after just one semester at A&M. They were like, please do not cook that. You failed. But Danny didn't tell anyone. Instead, he just continued to go to school every Tuesday and every Thursday.
And just like sit in the courtyard?
Yeah. He just kept going to school. Everything's good. Yeah. And he keeps this up for a while.
Wow. Mastermind.
On the other hand, though, he's failing in school, but he's excelling at work. He is showing up on time. He's working hard. He's like going the extra mile. It's like, polar opposites are happening. Now, in June of 1987, 26-year-old Deborah Ewing was working at a vision center in a mall strip in Conroe, Texas, when she barged into a financial office next door screaming for help. A woman named Gina was in the office bathroom when she heard the commotion. She came out and Deborah yelled that she had peed herself and that there was a man out there trying to attack her.
Oh,
Gina
no.
was terrified, but stepped towards the door, like trying to lock it.
Yeah.
But when she did, she could kind of see through the blinds of the window and she sees a man with a gun and her flight instinct kicks in and she turns around, runs past Deborah and locks herself in one of the offices and calls 911.
Oh, man.
Now, an officer is across the street, like across the highway, actually, and he gets over there within 70 seconds of the phone call.
That's some good work.
Yeah, very fast. Drove around the building, sees nothing, and then backup arrives, and they go inside where they find Gina locked in the office, and she tells them what happened. They look around. They cannot find Deborah anywhere. The only thing they found were her shoes and her purse outside the back of the vision center. So she is now a missing person. Gina told the police that the man was wearing corduroy pants and a brown hooded shirt. When the police talked to the owner of the vision center, she said that it sounded like a young man who was there installing cabinets earlier that same day.
Oh.
So they figure out who the cabinetry shop is and they call the owner, Ben Pruitt. So they tell Ben what's going on and say that the owner of the vision center said that it sounded a lot like one of his workers. Right off the bat, Ben, has Danny's defense and he says that there's no way that Danny could have done that. But he did tell the officers about Danny's past convictions. 2 days, 2 days later, on Sunday, a realtor was showing a potential buyer some land, but while they were walking around, they discovered the body of Deborah Ewing in some bush. Now, Deborah was naked from the waist down, and she had looked to have been stabbed to death. After the body was found, some teenage boys came forward and said that they had been playing by the lake. So it was like, I guess there was a lake near this property. And they'd been playing by this lake on Friday afternoon / early evening. And they remembered hearing screams from a woman.
This is just a game of people just not wanting to see truth. This is just, This is horrible.
I feel bad for these teens because, what are they going to do?
Yeah.
It's Texas. So it's a really, long and flat. And if there's a lot of brush, they couldn't see anything. But, as a teen, you hear screaming, what are you going to do? You know what I mean?
And it may not have, if they have never, heard a distressed person, maybe it doesn't really register with them because, their brain may not process it as, oh, that's a not a fun scream kind of thing.
That's a warning. Yeah. And it could have been she screamed only once, maybe twice, but then was hushed up. So if it was ongoing, maybe that would have been more alarming to them. You just never know.
Yeah. That's hard.
Cops looked at the most likely suspects, which would have been her ex-employer and her ex-husband, but both of them had solid alibis and quickly ruled out. Since Danny was the only one who was a viable suspect at this point, they called Ben and just asked him on Monday morning, just bring Danny in. Just bring him in and let's just talk to him and see what he says. So Ben's like, sure. Monday morning comes around, Danny walks in, tells him what's going on. Danny's like, sure, I'll go down and be questioned. So Ben takes him and they sit down and the cops start asking him about what he did after work. Danny says that he left the cabinetry shop at 4:20 p.m. He said he headed back to Temple, but he remembered seeing a watermelon stand. And he's like, I want to bring my parents a watermelon. So he drove around looking for this watermelon stand, but couldn't find it. No watermelon stand in sight. Lola is rolling her eyes so fucking hard right now.
I'm looking side to side, trying to make sense of watermelons
really?
And death at this point.
He couldn't find the watermelon stand. So he was like, shucks. So then he just went on and kept heading to Temple to see his family. And then he got to Temple. So he's trying to be like, I was just during the time of the murder driving around looking for a watermelon. I'm innocent.
I've never heard the watermelon excuse before. Okay.
I know, right? Like you pulled that one right out of your ass. So Danny is being very convincing. Even Ben Pruitt said he was very calm, collected. He was answering the officer's questions. He told his whole story over and over and over again. Like the cops would ask it in a kind of a different way or ask different parts to try to like get him to trip up or change his story. Never changed his story. So the cops were like, there's no way this guy did it, but let's just be extra sure. And let's see if the time frame works out. Danny left work at 4:20 and he had witnesses to corroborate this. And then Gina, the witness at the financial office next door to the Vision Center, she said she saw the man between 4:30 and 4:35. The drive from the cabinetry shop to the Vision Center was 14 minutes. Even though that time frame, 4:20 to 4:35, it's possible. It could happen. The cops were like, no way. It's too close. Traffic, stoplights, stop signs. It happens. You're cleared, Danny. Are you fucking kidding me? It fits, but they're like, it fits too good. You're clear. Only 6 weeks after Deborah's murder.
I
know.
Even considering
I'm like, guys,
all of that,
guys.
I feel like it's a blatant, like, it's not a blind eye. I see it, but I'm just going to look the other way,
Exactly. Unfortunately, only 6 weeks passed and the murder case, it had already gone cold. They had no leads. They had nothing. And every suspect they had cleared at this point. So it goes cold.
Just like the smiley face thing. Cold.
Yeah. Same one. Same thing. Now I will, before we get into the next murder, I will give another trigger warning. The child is not murdered in this case, but it's just very heartbreaking.
How many more are there?
I think this might be the last one. Murder.
Okay.
So a few months later, on October 31st, 1987, 36-year-old Mary Reisinger and her 4-year-old daughter, Kristen, spend the evening at their local fall festival in Huntsville, Texas. Now, I know I keep saying a bunch of different like cities and towns and stuff in Texas. Just know that Texas is very big. It's very flat. And even though you have big cities, you have a lot of small cities around them. So all of these cities are within like a 45-ish to an hour drive of like College Station and things like that. It's like a hub, basically. So Kristen, the 4-year-old, had just finished a ballet performance. And so she decided that she wanted to stay in her white ballerina outfit as her Halloween costume to go to the fall festival.
Cute.
After they left the festival, the mom decided to pull into a like do-it-yourself car wash station at around 7:40 p.m. Now, around this same time, Officer Dalger had decided to check in at the police station after his family got done trick-or-treating. Just want to check in, see how the night was going. Is it quiet? Anything crazy going on? As he's talking with a few of the officers, 3 women burst through the doors and yelled that there was a dead woman down the street at the car wash. Officer Dalger rushes out of the police station and he speeds over to the car wash. And when he arrives, he immediately sees Mary's lifeless body on the ground, covered in blood. When he got out of his truck and he approaches the car, he notices that there is a child inside jumping from door to door, locking them, trying to barricade herself inside the car. She was,
oh my God,
terrified. Officer Dogler knocks on the window and he tells Kristen that he was an officer and that he was there to help. He had to say this like multiple times before she would finally unlock the door. The moment she opened the door, she jumped into Officer Dogler's arms and gave him the biggest bear hug. He says, This is like the most touching moment when I saw him say this. He says that it's the biggest bear hug he'd ever had in his entire life. And still to this day, like he can feel that hug. And I'm like, rip my freaking heart out.
Yeah.
Now, while she is hugging him, she keeps saying, please don't let the bad man get me. Please don't let the bad man get me. He reassures her that everything is safe. And he looks down and he thinks that she's wearing a red ballerina outfit, only to quickly realize moments later that it was supposed to be white. She was covered in her fucking mother's blood. So her mother laid there outside the car dead, stabbed to death, covered in blood.
Oh my God.
And that 4-year-old literally was like probably shaking her mom, trying to get her mom up, and got all her mom's blood all over her.
Poor baby.
There will be a picture on Instagram. It's not red. It's a black and white photo. But you can see
the
how
outline.
much blood was on her. Yeah, it is fucking heartbreaking. Now, he asked her where the bad man went and she pointed. He asked what kind of truck the bad man was driving and she told him that it was like his. Officer Dogler's truck was like a 2-tone brown truck. Mm-hmm. So they immediately put on the radio and a search started quickly. Thankfully, Kristen was not physically hurt. And over the next few days, they brought in a psychologist to talk to her. But of course, they were not able to get any more detail from her. Now, Ben Pruitt, he had heard of Mary's murder through the newspaper and he was heartbroken. He knew the Reisinger family. He'd actually been very familiar with their family, was close to them, and some of the members, and he knew who Mary was. So he was devastated. And when he saw the sketch of the truck in the newspaper, he thought of Danny, but then quickly brushed it off because he was like, oh, the windows in the sketch had bars on it. And Danny's truck doesn't have bars on the windows. So it's not Danny. We're fine. Also, when Danny showed up to work that Monday, he had a fucking large cut on his hand. And Ben asked him how he got it. And he was like, I cut it on a Cocoa can.
Cocoa can?
What's up with this motherfucker and food with his excuses? Yeah. He cut it on a Cocoa can. Don't opening it. He's trying to open it.
Okay, then.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Again, like all of the other cases, the police in this area are struggling to investigate. This is not something that they see regularly or even semi-regularly. It's out of their wheelhouse. I think the fact that there was a child in this case, it got way more media attention. I mean, it was all over the news. And there was a witness, she was a witness to her mother's murder. So this kind of sensationalized the murder. I don't know. Yeah. I think that's the best word I can put to it. Sensationalized it. And this brought all of that attention. What this did was it actually gave the police too many leads. People were calling in right and left, giving them leads. And back then, this was not categorized electronically or stored electronically. These were handwritten notes, leads. And they were not stored properly. So a lot of leads went unnoticed time and time and time again. And this happened in this case.
All right.
Mary's family was sure that it was her ex-husband, but he was out of state hunting. And so he was quickly cleared. And just like the other cases, this again goes cold. They have no leads that actually point to a viable suspect. At least they don't think they do, because every lead that they keep getting through the phones are leading up dry. So they have nothing. But later on, we do find out that someone had actually called in and said that Danny Lee Corwin had a truck just like the one in the sketch, and he had a cut on his hand a few days after the murder.
Red flag.
But unfortunately, this was one of those leads that did not get investigated.
Red flag.
And also, we have no idea who called in that lead. This was in October. So now we're going into the holiday season. Over the holidays of that year, of 1987. Yeah, 1987. Becky ends up breaking up with Danny. And for Danny's wife, for some reason, was quiet for a while. At least that's what we know. Danny's life is quiet. Okay, that's all I'll say. He did end up getting a speeding ticket from Officer Larry Martin, which was one of Alice Martin's grandsons.
Mm-hmm.
So the lady with the carved smiley in her back. He didn't pay the speeding ticket. Why he's not paying his bills, I don't fucking know. He's an idiot. But due to them not paying this ticket, he was issued an arrest warrant, and he was arrested on September 29th, 1988. He was actually arrested by Larry Martin, ironically.
Oh my God.
Danny was taken into custody, fingerprinted, photographed, and then he was bonded out a little bit later. Like, I don't even think he was in jail for like 24 hours. 3 weeks after Danny's arrest, on October 29th of 1988, a woman named Wendy Gaunt was getting into her car at A&M. After she got in, she reached for her sunglasses in the floor of the passenger seat, only to find Danny in her doorway when she leaned back up.
He's so creepy. Why?
Does this sound familiar? Just a little bit? He was holding a knife and demanding her to scoot over.
This is the same story.
Don't just wait. This is insane. Immediately, Wendy tried to escape out the passenger door, but Danny was too quick and he jumped in, pulled Wendy back in, and before she knew it, she was somehow tied. Her arms were tied to the seatbelt of the vehicle.
What?
I don't fucking know how. She didn't even know how he did this. Like, she's like, it happened in a blink of an eye. Wendy is freaking out and starts trying to talk to Danny by asking him where they were going, what his plan was, and so on. She's just asking question after question. But every time that she would ask a question or try to talk, Danny would start yelling at her and telling her to shut up or he'd cut her throat.
Oh, God.
So she stops talking out of fear, which I would too. He drove her to a gravel parking lot that was under construction in a park area. He cuts her free from the seatbelt, but with his arms still tied, and pulls her out of the vehicle. Out of fear, Wendy stopped talking. Danny drove her to a gravel parking lot that was under construction in a park area. He cuts her free from the seatbelt, but with her arms still tied, and pulls her out of the vehicle. He then takes her down a pathway and pushes her into some bushes. He then cut her clothes off and starts raping her. While he's raping her, he notices that he can see the tops of trucks driving by. So he stops and pushes her deeper into the wooded area and continues to rape her. After he finishes, he ties her to a tree, but notices that she's loosening the ropes around her hands. So he came up behind her, puts the knife against her throat, and with one big cut, slit her throat. Immediately, she drops to the ground and grabs her throat. So she had loosened her hands enough to grab her throat.
Okay.
Blood is pouring everywhere. She can see Danny out of the corner of her eye, and she knew that, again, he's not going to leave if he thinks that she's alive. So just like Brenda, she pretends to be dead. Danny stood there watching her bleed out before he eventually walked away. Now, she's thinking that she's going to die, but she decided that if she was going to die, that she wanted to die closer to the road so that it would be easier for somebody to find her body.
Yeah.
So she gets up and walks towards the road. But when she gets closer, she sees Danny sitting in her car just waiting. She ends up hiding behind some bushes and just starts praying that he leaves. He eventually does, thank God. And she staggers out of the woods and collapses at the entrance of the park. It didn't take long. I think it was a park employee that actually found her and called for her help. And she was rushed to the hospital and put under emergency surgery. That same day, Ben Pruitt noticed that Danny was 30 minutes late to work. He was never late. And not only that, he actually showed up to work wearing nice clothes. Like Ben said, he was ready to go out on the town, not build cabinets, which is like a messy construction type job. Why are you coming in fancy clothes?
That's weird. Yeah.
And it was odd, and Ben made note of it. When Wendy got out of surgery, she couldn't talk because the wound in her neck was so deep.
Yeah.
But she demanded something to ride on. The first thing she wrote down was, quote, "Someone feed my horse."
I mean,
she was very worried.
Priorities.
She was very worried about her horse, which I was like, that's so cute. And then the next was, "Get me a sketch artist."
Oh, that's good.
Now, at this time, Karen Taylor was the only sketch artist around, and she was working out of Austin. After pleading with her boss, he finally agreed to let her go to College Station. But since Wendy couldn't talk, he didn't have high hopes that they would be able to come out with any kind of sketch. But Karen advocated and was like, let me do this. Let me do this. So he let her go. Now, when Karen showed up at the hospital, she spent hours with Wendy coming up with a sketch. And it took longer than normal because Wendy couldn't talk. So they were having to write everything down and go back and forth. But she was able to remember so many details of her attacker. After the sketch was finished, it was sent to the news and blasted over every single news station. Within 1 hour of it being on the news, they got their first lead. A prison guard from the prison where Danny was formerly incarcerated at called and identified the sketch as Danny Lee Corwin.
Finally.
Dun, dun, dun. Through some digging, investigators found out that Danny worked for Ben Pruitt, so they decided to call Ben, not Danny. At first, Ben wasn't surprised. They're suspecting a formerly incarcerated person, an ex-con. That's how they always do it. And Ben's like, no, he does have some past convictions. Tell some about him. And the guys are like, dude, this sounds just like his first attack. Like, come on. Ben says that, there's no way, but they're like, hey, can you just come down and look at the sketch? Just come down to the station, take a look at it. Just tell us what you think. He said the moment he laid his eyes on that sketch, he knew it was Danny. It was spot on for Danny Corwin. Wendy was able to remember every single detail about Danny's face, and we will put a comparison on Instagram so you can go and look at it. As Ben is talking with the officers, he remembers the cut on Danny's hand the Monday after Mary Reisinger's murder, and he tells the cops about that too. So now Danny is a suspect in Mary Reisinger's murder as well, but they're really focusing on Wendy's attempted murder and rape right now. Now, they need more evidence, so they take the picture from when Danny was arrested for not paying the speeding ticket, and they did a lineup for Wendy to pick out her attacker. She identified Danny, but she said that it wasn't 100%. And so this meant that police needed to keep digging because it wasn't enough evidence to get a slam dunk kind of case, and they were really looking for that slam dunk. They did find her abandoned car not long after she was taken to the hospital, and they had already searched it but came up dry. So in a last-ditch effort, they're like, let's search it again. They search it, and they end up finding a fingerprint on the steering wheel. And so they try to get Danny's arrest record fingerprints, but Danny was wearing fucking Band-Aids on his fingers from having cuts. So they couldn't compare those fingerprints. So then they had to call the prison that he used to be incarcerated at and ask for his fingerprints that were on file. And they're like, yeah, we'll get them to you. It'll take a few days because we have to send them in the mail. This is the 70s. They can't just email it over. So they put Danny under surveillance for the time until they get the fingerprints back. On October 28th, 1988, they got the call. Danny's fingerprints had came in and it was a positive match. This meant that they now have the evidence they need to arrest Danny, but they weren't sure if Danny would come quietly. So they came up with a plan to arrest him. They wanted to arrest him at his house, and they wanted to make sure that he was outside of his home, not inside, because they weren't sure if he had guns and things like that. So they decide to take a car from the impound lot, and the cops staged a little bump fender bender type thing with his car and the car they took from the impound lot. And they poured some alcohol on themselves to make it smell like they were drunk. They drive up to Danny's house. They drive into his driveway and kind of bump his truck enough to make some noise. Now they get out of the cars and they go up to the front porch, but the Danny doesn't come outside. I think the screen door was closed, but the main door was open. So the guys start saying, oh, I'm sorry, man. We hit your truck. I don't think there's any damage. I'm so sorry. And Danny from inside yells, it's okay. It's all right. No problem. But the officers are wanting him to come outside. So they're like, no. We need you to come out and look. We don't want you calling the cops after we leave. So please come out. So Danny's like, okay. So he gets up out of his chair. He stepped out onto the porch. And the moment he gets on the porch, he's put under arrest. And one officer says, sheriff's office, motherfucker. So they're pretty excited that they caught him. Now, Danny went in quietly and he pled guilty for the attack on Wendy. He was then sentenced to 99 years in prison, but was also suspected in the deaths of Alice, Mary, and Deborah, but he was not confessing to them. In prison, he was interviewed by one of the like people like does the like intake interviews, and he started questioning him about Alice and Mary and Deborah's murders. And through those interviews, he was able to get a somewhat of a confession, but they wanted more details. And so one officer took him, or a couple officers took him for a drive along to all the sites of the 3 murders to try to see if it would jog anything. And it did. And he would say a few things, but then like stop talking. When they got back from the drive along, he did write out a confession for the 3 murders, but it was a very bare bones, like, I, Danny Lee Corwin, murdered Deborah Ewing on such and such date by raping and stabbing her or strangling her. There was not much reason. There was not much detail. And so he was sentenced or tried for all 3 of those murders. And this was the first time that somebody in Texas was tried for all of their murders at one time. There was a new law that serial killers could be tried for all of their murders at one time. And Danny Lee Corwin was the first in Texas. Some people did testify on his behalf to try and spare him the death penalty, which was his mom and his sister. Not shocked. They said that he hit his head as a kid and even got hit in the head with a croquet mallet. And so like, that's why he's all fucked up the way he is. I think their intention was just trying to give a reason so that Danny would not be sentenced to death. It didn't work. Danny was sentenced to death in 1990, and he was put to death on December 7th, 1998. And his last meal was steak, potatoes, and a root beer.
I hate that meal now.
I know, right? Steak, potatoes, and root beer.
And I love root beer. God.
That is the case of Danny Lee Corwin.
Damn,
I will say that after he was arrested and it was found out that he murdered more and more people, the Pastor Keenan, ended up going to the prosecutor's home, and while he was like doing yard work outside, and actually apologized and said, I shouldn't have ever said that stuff about Brenda. I should never have defended Danny. And a little too late, because his defense of Danny is what got Brenda to not testify and made them start searching for a plea deal. So if he would have just shut his damn mouth, they would have been fine, and he would have gotten life in prison.
What a disservice.
Yeah.
I have a palate cleanser if you want.
What is your palate cleanser?
My palate cleanser is
palate cleanser.
Damn
I
it.
said that.
The good news. Okay, the good news. Researchers have discovered a new type of fast and furious cosmic explosion, and they named it after the Liverpool soccer team. That was on September 11th of 2023. So
what is a cosmic explosion?
I have no idea. I'm assuming it's like asteroids, something.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Hitting
like
each other.
Oh my
Maybe
gosh.
something like
That's
that.
crazy.
Space matter hitting each other. That's what it seems
Space
like.
matter exploding.
I have no idea.
My palate cleanser is, my husband said today that he has come up with a new rule, and that is for any holiday that we like to decorate, every year we have to buy at least two new decorations to go to our collection.
Oh.
And I was like, you are giving me permission to spend money on Halloween and Christmas decorations. And I love that.
I was going to say, I don't think he knows what he's done.
Oh, he does. He's into decorating as much as I am, and if not more. And so I was like, yes, that's awesome. So I'm really excited to like build our decorations for especially Halloween. I fucking love Halloween.
Hell yes.
The best. Hell yeah. Well, yeah, that's the case of Danny Lee Corwin. Next week, we will see you guys, and Lola will be presenting her own little case for you all. So we will see you guys then. Bye.
Bye. Also, heathens, if you're enjoying the show so far, please remember to subscribe on whatever platform you listen to us on. And remember to bring your sacrifice to the blood ritual. Just kidding, a review will suffice. Deadly Faith is brought to you by Choircast Network. It's produced by Laci Bean and Lola Robbins, and audio engineered by Eric Cowell. Thanks for listening.